Okay, now we're going to talk about relative pronouns. First of all, a review of the ones that are taught at the 100 level with que and quien. Let's have a look here. Now, the first thing you want to remember is that, yes, you can learn them. All right? These are not something you have never dealt with before. You deal with them in English. Now we're going to add Spanish. So, what is a relative pronoun? First of all, let's take a peek at some examples. My cousin who was Miss Indiana is young. The word who here is a relative pronoun. And the clause who was Miss Indiana refers to cousin. So she's both a relative and who is her relative pronoun. The car that I bought is old. That I bought is a clause that describes car. It starts with the word that because car is a thing rather than a person. The English relative pronouns are who, that, and which being used with commas. We'll talk about that in a moment. And in Spanish, they are que, quien, and quienes. These are the basic ones that are used commonly in speech and in everyday writing. When do we use a relative pronoun? First of all, we need to have two ideas that we want to connect, but not in two sentences. We want to put them in the same sentence. So we use que for a restrictive clause in all cases. It's a clause that is necessary to identify the item you're talking about. It could be, For example, the dog that is biting the people has rabies. In this case, that is biting the people identifies very clearly which dog we're talking about, and that dog is the one that has rabies. We use que because the clause is essential. The man who bought my house is rich. You can separate him out from the other people because he's living in my former house, and so that clause describes him. And we do use que for people. Que means who when the clause is restrictive like this. And in which situation do we use quien? When the clause is not restrictive, as in it does not have to be there for the sentence to be clear. And it is also a clause, which is a clause that gives additional information, but you do not have to have it there to differentiate between one item and another. And so here's an example. My wife, who lives in my house, is nice. My wife is nice is a perfectly good sentence. Just happened to mention that she lives in the same house I do. That is completely unnecessary information. And now we use quien because, first of all, we have commas setting us off the clause, and that is because we have information that we do not need in the sentence, and also we use quien because the antecedent, the person we're referring to, is a person. Mis hijos, quienes se parecen a mí, tienen talento. So that clause refers to hijos, and it's plural, so we switch to quienes, and we do not need to say that the kids look like me in the sentence, so it's non-essential, and thus we use commas and a form of quien. Okay, the commas are absolutely necessary for this situation. So we use quien also when we have a preposition in a person. So prepositions in relative clauses go at the beginning. So the man with whom I work is intelligent. That's ultra correct English. The man I work with is how we would say it in every day, but you need to use the pronoun at the beginning. We'll see that momentarily. But because we have con there, even though the clause is essential, we use quien. And the people with whom I work treat me well. in this situation, again, we have a preposition, and because the noun we're referring to is plural, we use quienes. You can't put a preposition at the end of a sentence in Spanish the way you can in English. She didn't like the guy she went to the dance with. It's perfectly acceptable English, and that comes from the use of Germanic grammar structure, word order. But in Spanish, you have to have con quien. There's no way around it. And it has to be at the beginning of the clause. Okay, now you have to be careful with commas. Look at these two sentences. My wife who lives in Chicago is nice. My wife who lives in Chicago is nice. One of these situations is illegal. Okay, by saying that my wife who lives in Chicago without commas, you're saying that there's more than one wife because this clause is essential. And that, of course, is bigamy. It's illegal. My wife with whom or who lives in Chicago is nice. Adding that she lives in Chicago is simply additional information, not necessary to the sentence. So the word loque, it refers to an idea. Remember that nouns are person, place, or idea, and this is where the idea situation comes in. It's nice out today, which makes me happy. This whole clause is the subject. It's not tiempo. That's not the antecedent. The whole clause is the antecedent, and so we use loque. The other situation in which we use it is when the reference precedes the noun it refers to. So what I do not understand is your desire to learn physics. So your desire is the noun that you're referring to, but the pronoun is in front of it, and so rather than, you can't say que no entiendo, you have to say lo que no entiendo. All right? Then it's time to look at the cual relative pronouns. These are the ones that are used to these are the ones that are used to elevate the tone of your language. You use them primarily in writing, but you can also use them in speech for reasons that we'll get into. So if you want to sound professional and somewhat snobbish in your writing, and you'll want to use these, it's standard language in academic work. That's what we use. For example, my book, which demonstrates that I am an intelligent, the el cual refers to book, and you could say que here, but using el cual shows a more tone. And also, if you have two antecedents, especially if they're of a different gender or number, the qual forms can come in handy. My book and my wife, who demonstrates that I'm intelligent, the la cual shows that I'm referring to esposa and not to book. Why? Because I guess I chose well in my wife choosing. In that circumstance, la cual separates esposa from book, and that's a good thing. And there are some prepositions where we want to use the cual form rather than the simple que. And here's an example: mis estudios para que pago mucho. All right, para que is also a conjunction that we're going to see later, and it's a trigger for a subjunctive, just so you know. And this here, this para que is a relative pronoun, not a conjunction. And so for clarity's sake, we're probably going to write para los cuales. It's super important. You might have this issue with por que and sin que, etc. There are a few others. And then the structure of the sentence with relative pronouns. You're going to put your clause either at the end or nested in the middle of a sentence. I want a car that is from 2020. Well, that's nice. Or I'm going to Gary, which is where I was born. Both of these clauses occur after, well, and I spoke with your father, who is a good person. All three of these clauses occur at the end of the sentence, and in two cases, because the information is not essential, we put one comma. Let's look at similar sentences where the pronoun and clause are nested. My car, which is from 2014, still runs perfectly well. Gary, which is my birth city, is where I'm going to spend the summer. And your dad, with whom I spoke yesterday, says that you should study more. So all three of these clauses are nested in the middle, and so if you need commas at all, and in these three cases you do, you use two commas. The reason my car, which is from 2014, needs commas is because I have just one car. If I had two cars and one was a 2021, it would be my car that is from 2014 that would identify the car and be a necessary statement, which means that I would get rid of the commas. But apart from that, we can use que. Anytime you want to replace the pronoun, you can say mi coche el cual, Gary el cual, actually la cual, and tu padre con el cual hablé. So that's how you would use the cual forms. And that pretty much takes care of this. So if you have any questions, by all means, raise them in class.